I'm going to start just by being myself, which is a fairly basic dad. You can see from the patches on the arms. And what I do, I imagine quite a few people do this as well. I talk to my son, he's 13, pretty much every day. I say, "How was school?" And he says, "Fine." So I kind of dig. I go, "What did you do?" And he goes, "Stuff. Lessons." And then I say, "What did you learn?" And again, he just kind of fobs me off. He goes, "Oh, stuff." And the thing with this is that there's something really universal about this experience. We just go to school and we accept that school is a certain way. School consists of desks and of teachers and of kids sitting there half asleep. And what's really astonishing about this to me is we don't really question what it's for. Now, there's something here. Actually, I was really interested that lots of the other speakers, at the start, I was wondering, could I be teachery? Right? Am I supposed to just talk? But lots of the other speakers asked questions and did hands up. So I'm allowed to do that, apparently. So hands up if you went to school. Yes, full participation from everyone. That's what the teacher wants. So we all went to school, and we all have an experience of school. And what's fascinating, we can do this as a question as well. Hands up if it was when you were a kid. Yeah, there we go, right? So you've all been to school, and it's been at this foundational part of your being. You've grown up, and you had this sense of yourself as built while you've been at school. And that means when you think about school, you don't think of it as something that changes or that shifts. You think about it as this kind of immutable law. That's just what school is. That's what it was for me, and that is fixed in my memory and in the past. Excuse me. But what I want to do, and what I've been doing for the last few years, is try and kind of pull that apart a little bit. So a few years ago, I was on the Social Mobility Commission for the government, and it involved looking into questions of social mobility. But I wasn't very satisfied with some of the answers that came up on it. And so I set out to write my own book. And what I did was, over the course of a couple of years, I visited about 20 schools. And in each school, I interviewed kids in some depth. I spent quite a while talking to them. And I asked them a key question to start with. I asked them, what is school for? What's the function of it? What are you getting out of it? So I'm going to start by giving you some of the things they said. So the first thing, loads of them, they said, education. Great, okay? Doesn't really tell us a huge amount, though. What is education? Bit more detail. Your future, like, so you can get money in a house and get a good job. And there was a lot of people like this, saying it was about career or job or aspiration. So you don't end up in a bad place. There's a sense of threat. If you don't do well at school, it's going to go wrong. And actually, it can go very wrong indeed, because one poor kid thought, if I don't do well, I'm going to end up on the streets. Yeah? I'm going to be begging for money. And really, what it came down to was this sense that school was just a necessity for kids. You just need school. And to me, what tied all of these answers together was this sense of school as a transaction. School is a place where you get something. I'm there to get my grades. I'm there to get my education. I'm there to get my future. I'm there to get not sleeping on the streets. Okay? But I actually think there's something more than that going on. And I think that we need to think about that carefully. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to start with what I did in my research, which is think a bit about the history of schools. So when you think about the history of schools, and you go back to the start of universal education, you come across the Universal Education Act of 1870. And this is a quote by William Gladstone, Prime Minister at the time, about why it was so important that we should have universal education. And it is absolutely mind-blowing to me. Because he didn't say we should have universal education because all the kids need to know stuff. He didn't say we should have universal education because, kids are the future and we just want them to grow. He said, look at the Germans. They've got a great army. They've just won the Franco-Prussian War, and if we had universal education, we could also have a great army. And it's amazing this, because lots of educational reformers in the 19th century said similar things. There's a guy called Sir James K. Shuttleworth, and he said, there's nothing so conducive to order as universal education. He said, Tories should be naturally in favor of universal education. And what all this tells us is that actually we conceive of education as this great project of growing and becoming. But the way it's been constructed has actually been often about control. Now, it's not even as simple as that, though, because, of course, at the same time, inevitably, you have universal education, and you start putting ladders in place for people to kind of change their lives and move forward. And it does create social mobility. So it does also become about bettering yourself. And then there's a kind of third aspect, which is that education can be quite frightening. Because one of the reasons that the universal education came in was because there was all sorts of other education going on. Wesleyans, Chartists, rabble-rousers who might make people think above their stations. So education can be a locus of revolution as well. And then in 1906, there was another revelation associated with the army when the British government looked at the army and said they're in very, very bad condition. The poor people are really not looking good, so we better start giving them free school meals. So school becomes a source of welfare as well. And it's so interesting, this. We think we know what school is, but actually the history of school has been about, yes, bettering yourself, but also about controlling people. It's also been about welfare. And it's also been about that sense of kind of power and the transfer of power. Now, there's one more thing, though, which I think is really, really important, because when you get to 1944, that's the start of the modern system. And in 1944, there was a new word which had never been thought of in education. And that word was fair. Until 1944, no one expected education to be fair. There was no sense that it was there in order to make sure that everyone had a chance. It was there in order to do these very different things. But suddenly, in 1944, we introduced fairness. And what's amazing is how important fairness is to kids. Here's some of the things they say about fairness. All right? They say that they want fairness in what they choose in terms of their subjects. They say that fairness is a basic morality. And when I talk to children, when I'm telling them off or when I'm congratulating them, fairness is absolutely fundamental to how they see the world. It's also pretty fundamental to basic things like toilet passes and so on, right? You know, you've got to get it right in schools because otherwise people start to object. But I think that this is one of the most persuasive things. This quote is actually from someone who's ended up being very successful. He's a big Hollywood actor now. He says that he talks about one of his favorite teachers, and the key reason that she was his favorite teacher was because she was tough, but she was fair. All right? And that fairness was the quality that made education work. We've got a problem, though, because fairness isn't as simple as it seems. When we talk about it, we maybe think in terms of equality, right? If we make all schools the same, then things will be fair. And that is legitimately one way to think about it. But we might also think about it in terms of equity, the idea that people get what they deserve as well. And again, traditionally, we have a way of responding to this in schools, which is we make sure all exams are the same so we can kind of sort people by ability. And we make it equitable by giving the people who are able the jobs and the opportunities in their later life that are appropriate for them. But I'm going to show you a graph which reveals a huge, huge problem. So this graph shows a really basic fact about schools, which is no matter how good schools are, no matter how successful, how high-achieving, they always have a gap in the achievement of those students within them who are poor and those who come from more advantaged backgrounds. Now, you can see these schools classified according to Ofsted categorization, which is flawed, but we can do it in all sorts of different ways, and you can see there is always a consistent gap. And as soon as you start thinking about this, you recognize, of course, it's intuitively true. I know that kid A, who goes home to a lovely desk set up in his bedroom with a picture of the Hubble Space Telescope on the wall and doing all the nice things, they're not going to be in the same situation in the final exams as kid B, who goes home to his mum with a needle in her arm. And these are real, by the way. It's really important that people who are not in schools recognize that all of the terrible things you read about happen. And any comprehensive school teacher encounters them on a daily basis. These kids are not in the same boat. And if you put them in an equal school with equal exams, they're still not going to get the same results. Now, there are ways we can tackle that, but there is a big, big problem that we've also got to get to. And that is that the way we approach the school system is shaped by its past. The whole journey that I've taken you on through that 19th century conception of these different roles of school, it ends with a system which still has this fundamental need to do one vital and damaging thing, and that is to rank people. Now, if you think of it this way, grammar schools, and we all know what a grammar school is. The idea is you take kids who are the most successful at age 11 and you put them towards an academic path that they then follow. And the idea of that is that what you're doing is you are getting the ones who are capable of a certain thing and giving them the education that they need. But of course you're not. What you're doing is you're saying, here are the number of places available, 25% of the school places, in the case of grammar schools when they were instituted in 1944, and you're saying, I'm going to take the top 25% of kids. Now, as soon as you look at this graph, you understand the problem with that. If opportunity goes to the top, and there is always a gap that no school, no matter how good, has managed to eradicate, then opportunity is hoarded. And I'll go back to some of the other things we've heard this afternoon, about the wealth inequality. That all feeds into this as well. We have a situation where, as many people have commented, education risks becoming a propagation of inequality rather than a release from it. Now, there's a huge amount that one can say about this, but my point is very, very simple. We are at a moment of change and inflection. And if we are to do good by our children, and we're to give them the future that they want, we need to think differently about schools. And there are 5 key narratives that I think that we need to start telling. First of all, education is not a marketplace. If we make it a marketplace, if we make it about transaction, about winning, then we are going to make certain kids the losers, and they do not deserve that. Secondly, school is at the heart of a community. Again, it's amazing in an event like this how all of the talks seem to fit together. And one of the things that we've already heard is about this idea of a kind of atomization, a culture that is no longer talking to each other. Schools still talk to each other. In a school, you have that cross-section of society, and we need to lean into that. We need to make schools that are about every child, not just the academically successful ones. Knowledge is for everyone. At the moment, we have a system whereby we go from university level, plotted down, reverse engineered, so that we are designing our system around the needs of those who go on to study at the highest level. We need to be ambitious about the knowledge our children have, but it needs to be universal knowledge. The kind of knowledge we want everyone to have. The kind of knowledge about political systems, the kind of knowledge about culture and society that brings us together rather than separates us out into individual ranked groups. School is for everyone. We have to have schools that are inclusive, that have spaces for everyone. That doesn't mean never excluding. That doesn't mean everything's all happy, clappy, nothing ever goes wrong. But it does mean if a child is excluded from school, they deserve just as good an education outside of school or in an alternate provision or wherever they end up. Every child deserves their education. And lastly, when we measure, whether it's through exams or Ofsted, or however we do it, we need to make sure we're doing it for the sake of the child, not for the sake of the ranking. I've run out of my time. I could go on. Thank you very much.
It's, for me, just an endlessly fascinating topic, this. We had in our first year, or the second year of this event, we had Sugata Mitra, which is another well-known person that speaks about perhaps some of the shortcomings of our system. Since you are not only speaking about the system and what needs to change, but obviously inside the system, and that is unusual, what prevents, because there have been obviously many folks through years and decades trying to change, improve things. What do you find prevents things from changing more quickly?
I think, it's worth saying that there have been good changes in the last, I've been teaching 23 years and I've seen a lot of stuff improve. Mm-hmm. But I think that the big thing that holds us back, right, I'm going to go for the really big thing. This is the big, bright ideas. We're talking. The big thing that's holding us back is society at large.
Okay.
Because actually, if we go back to what Kim said at the start of the session, what Liam was talking about just now, if we don't have a society outside schools that provides opportunity and that seems fair and equitable, then schools can't work within that.
Right.
And again, when you look at successful school systems across the world, the universal thing is it's about the relationship of the wider society to school. Right. And on a really basic level, I teach in Sunderland. If my students hear from me that, do well in your exams and there's a world of opportunity, but they go home and they don't see that, they don't believe me.
Yeah, of course not. Okay, so that's a very useful and important point. You mentioned that in these 23 years that you feel like there have been lots of actually. So is there obviously. Don't go through all, I'm sure there are tons. Is there one that really sticks out as something that's really kind of
I think
moved
the
needle?
thing that's definitely changed is that teaching as a profession takes the science of learning much more seriously.
Okay.
So there's a whole kind of movement towards actually using the insights of cognitive science in teaching,
Nice.
and that's been very, very successful largely. There are risks with it, because when you translate science to the classroom, the practicalities of it, you can lose things.
Yeah. Of
And
course.
sometimes you get these kind of lethal mutations of ideas which can be damaging.
Yeah.
But in general, there's a much more of an openness and a willingness to actually think about the science of what we're doing.
How people learn, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so because the really big thing is something that's going to be difficult for us to change, certainly here today, are there things that are more within the power of the system to change that it should be changing?
Yeah, so those 5 things that I've put there in the book, I talk in more detail about how we could tell those narratives better. So for example, education is not a marketplace. We can actually start controlling that by changing admissions. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that's really difficult at the moment is the idea that people choose their school.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we know what that means. That means middle-class people choose their school.
Sure.
Right? So if we actually empower schools and we change the system so that schools have admissions that reflect the proper demographic makeup of their area, then you no longer have that dynamic of the middle-class school and the working-class school and that damaging difference that can develop between them.
Interesting. Sammy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, could I... Thank you.